The first time, Oliver Blackwell ordered Lillian Cruz to accompany him anywhere she thought it was a mistake, a cruel joke, or maybe some twisted test from a man who didn't know how to say please. After all, she was the nanny, the woman who folded tiny socks, read bedtime stories, and cleaned up dinosaur toys from under expensive marble tables. But that afternoon, standing in the doorway of his penthouse living room, she realized nothing about Oliver Blackwell was accidental. "I need to talk to you." "Alone," he said, his tone as cold and precise as the cut of his suit. Lillian froze, still holding a giraffe-shaped puzzle piece in her hand. Little Leo looked up from the floor, eyes wide with curiosity. "Is something wrong with Leo?" she asked, instinctively protective. "No," Oliver replied. "It's about tonight. You're coming with me to the company gala." She blinked, trying to process the words. "I'm sorry, what?" He crossed his arms, the faintest trace of impatience flickering across his features. "The person who was supposed to accompany me canceled. I need someone. You're here. Problem solved." Lillian stared at him, almost laughing. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm the nanny. I wasn't hired to be your date. Tonight, you'll be both." His voice carried that effortless authority that came from years of command. Her heart pounded, not from flattery, but disbelief. "That's not in my contract," she countered. "It is now." He turned on his heel, already walking away, as if his decision had been carved in stone. "Wait, so you think you can just summon me like I'm ordering room service?" Oliver stopped and turned his blue-gray eyes, unreadable. "I pay well. I've arranged for a stylist. Dress, hair, everything. Be ready by 8. The audacity of it stole her breath. "What's wrong with my hair?" she muttered, half under her breath. "What's already nice," he said evenly, "can always be made better." The man was infuriating. And yet, as the door closed behind him, something inside her stirred. Not admiration, not attraction, but a spark of defiance. If he thought she was going to stand beside him, like a silent ornament, he was sorely mistaken. That evening, as the stylist, a bubbly woman named Grace, arrived with a rack of dresses, Lillian tried to convince herself this was nothing, just another ridiculous order from a rich man used to getting his way. But when she stepped into the red gown that fit her like it had been made for her, when she saw her reflection in the mirror, soft waves falling over her shoulders, eyes, bright lips, painted with confidence she hadn't seen in years, she froze. She looked like someone she used to know. The woman she'd been before life had cornered her into survival. By the time the clock struck 8, she descended the marble staircase like a secret the world wasn't supposed to see. Oliver was adjusting his tie near the grand piano when he looked up, and for a brief, fragile moment, his mask slipped. His gaze lingered longer than it should have, the air between them suddenly electric. "You look acceptable," he finally said, clearing his throat. Lillian tilted her head, a faint smile curving her lips. "Not too bad for someone who's supposed to clean up after your son, huh?" He ignored her jab and offered his arm. "Shall we?" "I'm going for me," she said lightly, slipping her hand into the crook of his arm. "Not for your headlines. Fine, as long as you smile in the photos." When the limousine door closed behind them, Lillian caught her reflection in the tinted glass. For the first time in years, she didn't see a woman trying to make ends meet. She saw someone about to rewrite her own story. The ballroom of the Westwood Hotel glittered like a fairy tale chandeliers, dripping with light violins humming in the background, laughter laced with ambition. The moment they walked in, the noise softened eyes, turning their way. Oliver, the untouchable CEO, and beside him, the woman no one expected. Whispers started instantly. Lillian felt them, the weight of curiosity pressing against her back. But instead of shrinking, she lifted her chin higher. Every step she took was deliberate, every smile controlled. Then came the inevitable. Meredith Kensington, the elegant, icy ex-fiancée, glided across the room like a queen reclaiming her throne. Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "Oliver, darling, I didn't know you were bringing company. How refreshing." Lillian smiled, calm and steady. "Good evening, Lillian Cruz." Meredith's handshake was a formality, her gaze slicing over the red dress. Bold color. Not everyone can pull it off. "True," Lillian said softly, "but I've never been interested in blending in." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut crystal. Meredith blinked, her practiced charm cracking for half a second. Oliver's lips twitched, the closest thing he'd had to a smile all evening. As they moved through the room, conversation after conversation, Lillian began to notice something. The more authentic she was, the more people listened. When one French investor asked if she worked for Blackwell Holdings, she didn't stumble. In a way, she replied, "I help the company stay grounded in the real world." By the time dinner was served, even Oliver seemed different, less rigid, more human. He leaned toward her, at one point, his voice low. "You're enjoying this?" "Immensely," she whispered. "You thought I'd embarrass you, didn't you?" "I considered the possibility." "Well," she said, meeting his eyes, "you'll have to get used to being surprised." He studied her for a moment too long, as if seeing her for the first time. There was a softness there, fleeting but undeniable, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Later that night, as they left the gala, Lillian caught her reflection again in the glass doors. It wasn't the dress that made her different. It was the way she carried herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, breathing, reclaiming. Oliver opened the car door for her, his hand brushing hers, for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "You handled yourself well tonight." Was that a compliment? "Don't get used to it." "I won't," she said, smiling faintly. "But I'll remember it." He glanced at her then, and something unspoken passed between them, something that made the night air feel heavier, warmer. Neither of them said a word for the rest of the drive. But when the city lights flickered across his face, Lillian realized that maybe, just maybe, the man she thought was made of stone had cracks after all. And cracks, she thought, were where the light began to get in. If you've ever believed that one unexpected night can change everything, remember this story. Because sometimes, the moment you're forced into someone else's world is the moment you finally discover your own. The morning after the gala, the mansion was unusually quiet. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting golden streaks across the marble floors. But even the air seemed hesitant to move, like it was holding its breath after what had happened the night before. Lillian walked into the kitchen, still barefoot, wearing Leo's cartoon-covered apron over her t-shirt. She poured herself coffee, pretending nothing had changed. But she could feel it, the weight of something unspoken lingering between her and Oliver Blackwell. Leo was at the table, busy coloring a dinosaur. He looked up and grinned. "You looked like a princess last night." She smiled, ruffling his messy hair. "A very tired princess, maybe." Before she could say more, the sound of polished shoes against marble echoed from the hallway. Oliver entered, every inch the composed CEO again, dark suit expression. Unreadable, back to his armor of control. For a second, their eyes met. The memory of his hand on hers, as he'd helped her into the car, flickered between them. He broke it first. "Good morning," he said, pouring his own coffee without looking up. "Morning," she replied evenly. "Your event was successful, I assume?" "It was," he said, his tone neutral. You made quite an impression." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerously close to a compliment." He didn't answer, just sipped his coffee, but she caught the faintest curve at the corner of his lips. Later that day, while she helped Leo build a cardboard spaceship in the garden, she overheard two house staff whispering by the kitchen door. Words floated in the air, her Blackwell gala, the red dress. "Who is she?" followed by soft laughter. Lillian kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but her hands trembled slightly as she folded the cardboard wings. She wasn't used to being the subject of curiosity. For years, she'd built her life on being invisible, quiet, efficient, forgettable. Yet last night had shattered that safety, and now there was no hiding again. When Oliver came home that evening, Leo ran to him, arms open wide. "Dad, Lillian says, if we finish the spaceship, we can fly to the moon." "Is that so?" Oliver asked, lowering himself to the boy's level. He glanced up at Lillian standing behind Leo, a smudge of glue on her cheek. She looked normal again, beautiful in a way that wasn't meant to impress anyone. Real. "It's his project," she said quickly, as if explaining herself. "I see." His voice softened just a little. "Then I expect a full report when you land." That made Leo giggle. Lillian smiled, but as Oliver walked away, she felt his gaze linger a heartbeat too long. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt both familiar and strangely charged. They spoke more almost against their will, over breakfast, while waiting for Leo's school car. In the evenings after the boy had gone to bed, when silence made the house too large. It was during one of those evenings that everything shifted again. Lillian had gone into Oliver's study to leave Leo's progress report on the desk, but he was still there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on the screen. The glow from his laptop carved sharp lines across his face, making him look less like a CEO and more like a man who hadn't slept in days. "You're working late," she said softly. "I usually do," he replied without looking up. "Do you ever stop?" He paused, finally meeting her gaze. "Not really. When you stop, things fall apart." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Or maybe they fall into place." He stared at her for a moment, as if trying to understand whether she was challenging him or trying to save him from himself. "You really think that I know that," she said quietly. "Some things need to break before they can become something better." For a long time, he said nothing. The clock ticked faintly in the background. Then unexpectedly, he leaned back in his chair and asked, "What were you doing before this?" "Before all of this?" Her answer came slowly, each word careful. "I was studying psychology. I wanted to help people. But then my mother got sick. Bills piled up, so dreams had to wait." Oliver's eyes softened, and for the first time, he didn't look like a man who held all the answers. "And do you miss it?" "Every day," she admitted. "But Leo makes it easier. He reminds me that even small acts matter." "Small acts," he repeated quietly, like it was a foreign language he wanted to learn. After that night, Oliver started to change, not dramatically, not in ways the world would notice, but in small, almost invisible gestures. He came home earlier. He sat with Leo for dinner instead of eating alone in his office. And sometimes he lingered in the kitchen just to listen to Lillian talk about nothing in particular. It wasn't romance yet, but it was something tender and fragile that neither dared to name. One afternoon, a knock came at the door. A courier handed Lillian a sleek black envelope embossed with the Blackwell Holdings seal. She opened it, frowning. Inside was a formal note, neatly typed, bearing only a few lines. "Miss Cruz, your presence is requested at the upcoming board reception. Formal attire required. OB." She laughed under her breath. "He's at it again," she murmured. That evening, she found him in the study reviewing files. "You could have just asked me," she said, holding up the envelope. "I did," he replied without looking up. "You sent me a letter. We live in the same house. I find it keeps things professional." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Is that what this is? Professional?" He looked up then, something flickering in his eyes. Something that wasn't professionalism. "You represented the company well last time. The investors will expect to see you again. So I'm your lucky charm now. If that's what it takes to close a deal," he said dryly. She sighed, shaking her head. "You really don't know how to ask nicely, do you? Apparently I hire people who teach me how." For the briefest moment, they both smiled. When the night of the reception came, Lillian wore a simple navy gown, not red this time, but deep and quiet, like the ocean after a storm. She didn't expect to stand out, but when she walked in beside Oliver, conversations faltered once again. She carried herself differently now, not with defiance, but with grace. She no longer needed to prove anything. During a toast, one of the investors approached her. "Miss Cruz," he said warmly, "I was impressed with your insights on the Horizon proposal. Have you ever considered joining our development team?" Lillian blinked, surprised. "I'm not sure I'm qualified." "You'd be surprised what qualifies a person," the man replied. "Sometimes it's not degrees or titles. It's perspective." Across the room, Oliver was watching, and though his expression remained composed, his chest tightened. Pride, admiration, and something else tangled together until he couldn't tell them apart. Later that night, as they returned home, the car ride was silent, but full of meaning. The city lights blurred outside the windows. Lillian looked out, her reflection faint in the glass. "I think tonight went well," she said softly. "It did," Oliver answered, but he wasn't talking about the meeting. When they reached the mansion, Leo was already asleep. Lillian turned to leave for her room, but Oliver stopped her with just a word. "Lillian." She turned. He looked at her as if trying to memorize something he couldn't quite hold. "You belong in places like that," he said quietly. "Not because of me, because of you." Her breath caught. For once, she didn't have a clever answer. She just nodded and walked away, her footsteps echoing softly through the hall. And for the first time in years, Oliver stayed awake, not because of work, but because of a woman who had somehow stepped into his carefully controlled life and rewritten the rules without ever meaning to. The rain began just as Lillian was tucking Leo into bed, soft and steady, against the wide glass windows of the mansion. The boy's eyelids fluttered, his small hand gripping hers, as if he could anchor her there forever. She stayed until his breathing steadied, then slipped out quietly, her thoughts heavier than the storm outside. Lately, everything had felt off balance. She wasn't sure when the line between her work and her heart had blurred, but it had, and every moment around Oliver Blackwell made it worse. Downstairs, the lights in his study were still on. Through the half-open door, she saw him bent over his desk, sleeves rolled up, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, commanding the sound of someone used to being obeyed. But then something shifted. He looked up and saw her standing there. For a second, he forgot whatever deal he was negotiating. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rain. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said softly, stepping back. He gestured for her to stay. "You didn't. The call's done anyway." Another late night. Every night's a late night. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident beneath the sharp edges of his composure. "What about you? Shouldn't you be asleep by now? I could ask you the same thing. He smiled faintly, that rare fleeting curve that never reached his eyes. Touché. Lillian hesitated at the threshold, torn between leaving and staying. Finally, she walked in, drawn by something she didn't dare name. I was going over Leo's new schedule. He's doing better, you know. More confident. He even volunteered to read in class today. Oliver's eyes softened. That's good. You should have seen his face, she said, smiling despite herself. He's proud of himself. I'm proud of him too, he replied quietly. Then after a pause, and of you. She froze. Compliments from Oliver were rare, precious things like cracks in the armor he wore around his heart. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. His tone was steady, but there was something raw underneath. You've changed him. You've changed this house, even me. Lillian tried to laugh it off, but it came out unsteady. I doubt that. Don't. He stood, closing the distance between them. His height, his quiet intensity, it all made her pulse quicken. You've done more than anyone in years. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain grew heavier, filling the silence with rhythm. She could feel his gaze, warm and unsettling. Oliver, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This isn't what I signed up for. I know, he murmured. But maybe it's what you needed. The words hung in the air like electricity. Then, almost abruptly, he stepped back, breaking the tension before it consumed them both. We have a problem at the office, he said, his tone returning to business. The Horizon project lead is sick. There's a major investor meeting tomorrow, and no one else knows the material well enough to present it. Lillian frowned. Then cancel. He shook his head. We can't. It's too important. Then, find someone else. His eyes met hers. I did. It took her a moment to realize what he meant. No, she said immediately. Absolutely not. Lillian, you know the project better than anyone after David. You've read every report, asked the right questions. I'm a nanny, not an executive. You're more than that, he said quietly. And you know it. Her heart thudded in her chest. They won't take me seriously. They will when they hear you speak. She shook her head, backing away slightly. I can't. That's your world, not mine. Maybe it should be yours too. The next morning, she stood outside the towering glass doors of Blackwell Holdings, clutching the tablet he'd given her. Her reflection stared back at her hair, neatly tied gray blazer, trembling hands. She could still hear Oliver's calm voice from that morning. You'll be fine. Just tell them the truth. That's what they remember. When she stepped into the boardroom, all eyes turned to her. Dozens of men in tailored suits, their expressions polite but skeptical. Oliver introduced her with the same confidence he used to close billion-dollar deals. This is Miss Lillian Cruz, he said evenly. She'll be leading today's presentation. A murmur rippled across the room. Lillian took a deep breath, forcing her shoulders back. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. Good morning. I'm not here to talk about numbers. I'm here to talk about people, the ones behind those numbers. She spoke of neighborhoods forgotten by progressive children who grew up in shadows of wealth they would never touch. She described how the Horizon project could bring not just development, but dignity. Her words painted pictures more powerful than any chart. And slowly, one by one, those skeptical faces began to change. When she finished, there was silence. Then applause. Genuine, thunderous applause. Oliver didn't clap right away. He just looked at her, stunned, as if seeing her again for the first time. After the meeting, as they walked out together, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I can't believe that just happened. I can, he said simply. She laughed softly. still dazed. You really trust me too much. Not enough, he corrected. That night, back at the mansion, Lillian found Leo asleep on the couch, surrounded by drawings of rockets and stars. Oliver stood nearby, hands in his pockets, watching his son with quiet tenderness. When he noticed her, he smiled faintly. You did well today, he said. So did you. Letting someone else take over isn't easy for you. He chuckled softly. You've noticed. It's hard not to. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, You know, I think I've been wrong about a lot of things. About what makes someone strong. About what success really is. Lillian tilted her head, curious. And what have you decided? That maybe strength isn't control. Maybe it's trust. Her heart caught. There was something different in his voice, softer, unguarded. Before she could respond, he stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his cologne and coffee. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone, Lillian, he said quietly. Not to them, not to me. She wanted to speak, to tell him how much those words meant, but her throat was tight. The moment hung there, fragile and trembling, until Leo stirred, rolling over with a sleepy sigh. They both turned, smiling unconsciously. I should get him to bed, she said. Of course. His voice was calm, but his eyes followed her as she bent to lift the boy. When she disappeared down the hall, he let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Later that night, when she finally returned downstairs, he was still there. You don't sleep much, do you? She asked softly. Not lately. Why? He looked at her, and the answer came without hesitation. Because every time I close my eyes, I see you standing in that boardroom, proving me wrong about everything I thought I knew. The rain had stopped by then, but the storm between them had only just begun. The days that followed the presentation blurred into a quiet rhythm neither of them dared to name. Something had changed after that day in the boardroom. Something invisible, yet undeniable. Oliver still buried himself in numbers and reports. But now, every time he looked up from his desk, he found traces of Lillian in his world, her handwriting on a forgotten note, her laughter echoing faintly from the garden, her scent lingering in the hallway after she passed. It unsettled him, this new awareness, this quiet presence that refused to be categorized like a column on a balance sheet. Lillian, for her part, tried to keep her heart in check. She told herself that what had happened was simply professional, an opportunity, a test, nothing more. But the lie grew thinner with every evening they spent in each other's orbit, with every glance that lasted a second too long. Leo's world had never been brighter, his father's walls never thinner. And she, caught between duty and something far more dangerous, found herself tiptoeing along the edge of a line she'd sworn not to cross. One evening, she found Oliver in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, standing helplessly in front of a frying pan that hissed with smoke. "Don't tell me you're cooking," she said, half amused, half alarmed. "I'm attempting to," he replied, waving the spatula like a white flag. Leo wanted pancakes for dinner. "I thought I could manage." She laughed, stepping in to take over. "You thought wrong." He moved aside, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The sound of her soft humming, the effortless grace in her hands, it felt domestic in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Too natural, too dangerous. "You do this often?" he asked quietly. "What rescues CEOs from their own kitchens?" That he said with a faint smile, "and make chaos look like home." She paused, startled by the gentleness in his voice. "I just do what needs to be done. Maybe that's what I've been missing," he murmured, more to himself than to her. When the pancakes were done, they sat at the counter with Leo, who chattered about school dinosaurs and a class project that involved glitter and glue. Oliver listened, his gaze often drifting toward Lillian, as if her laughter had become the background music to his evenings. When Leo ran off to fetch his drawings, Oliver's voice dropped. "You've changed him," he said softly. "He smiles more, talks more. He's lighter." "That's all him," Lillian replied. "He just needed someone to listen." "And you?" His question came unexpectedly. "What do you need?" She looked up, caught off guard by the sincerity in his eyes. "I'm not sure I remember," she admitted. He didn't press. But later that night, after she'd gone to her room and the house had fallen silent, Oliver found himself standing outside her door, his hand hovering just short of knocking. He didn't. Instead, he turned away and went to his study, where the glow of the city outside felt colder than usual. A week later, a storm hit the city. Thunder rolled across the sky, rain hammering against glass. The mansion's power flickered, then went out entirely. Lillian was in the living room with Leo lighting candles when Oliver came down the stairs with a flashlight. "Everything all right?" he asked. "We're fine," she said, though her voice trembled slightly at the sound of the thunder. "Leo hates the dark." "I don't," the boy protested, clinging to her arm anyway. Oliver crouched beside him, voice low and steady. "You know, when I was your age, I used to count during storms. Every time lightning flashed, I'd count how long it took for the thunder. The longer the gap, the farther away it was. Want to try it?" Leo nodded, fascinated. And so, the three of them sat together on the rug, counting between flashes. The candlelight danced across their faces, the storm outside forgotten for a moment. Lillian watched Oliver, how patient he was with his son, how his laughter came easily when Leo lost count. It was the first time she saw him without the weight of his world on his shoulders. When Leo finally drifted to sleep against her side, she whispered, "You're good with him." "He deserves better than I've been," Oliver replied quietly. "He deserves what he already has," she said. "A father who's trying." He turned to look at her. The light flickered, catching the reflection of something raw in his eyes. "I didn't think anyone could walk into this house and make it feel alive again." Her heart beat too fast. "It's not me. It's him. It's both of you." The silence that followed was soft and fragile. The storm had quieted, but something else hummed in the air, something they both felt, but neither dared to touch. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows again, as if the night had never happened. Lillian was making breakfast when Oliver walked in, tie undone, phone in hand. "Cancel the investor meeting," he said abruptly into the receiver, then ended the call. Lillian frowned. That sounded serious. It was. "I canceled it." She blinked. "Why?" He hesitated, as though the answer itself felt foreign. "Because I promised Leo I'd be there when he presented his project at school. And because you once told me that some things are more important than meetings." She stared at him, warmth rising in her chest. "I didn't think you were listening." "I was," he said simply. "I still am." That afternoon, they went to Leo's school together. The small classroom buzzed with noise and crayons and glitter. When Leo proudly presented his rocket made from cardboard and paint, Oliver clapped louder than anyone. Lillian glanced at him, smiling quietly. He wasn't the man who'd once measured worth in numbers and contracts. Not anymore. Afterward, as they walked back to the car, Leo skipping ahead, Oliver said softly, "You were right about letting things fall apart. Sometimes it's the only way to build something real." Lillian turned to him. "You're starting to sound like me." He smiled faintly. "Worse things could happen." The drive home was quiet but comfortable, filled with that strange kind of peace that comes only after storms. When they arrived, Leo ran off to show his drawings to the housekeeper, leaving the two of them alone in the entryway. Oliver reached for her suitcase. She'd been planning to move into the smaller apartment next to the property part of a new arrangement she'd insisted on to create distance. But he stopped. "You don't have to go," he said. Her breath caught. "Oliver, stay. At least until we figure out what this is." Her pulse raced, but she shook her head gently. "You don't know what you're asking." "Yes, I do," he said, his voice low, steady. "I'm asking you to stop pretending this isn't happening." The silence stretched, and in it was everything they hadn't said. The late-night glances, the laughter in the kitchen, the shared storms and small salvations. She wanted to say yes, to surrender to the pull she felt every time he looked at her, but something in her still fought to breathe on her own. "I can't," she whispered finally. "Not yet." He nodded once, his jaw tightening. "Then I'll wait." She turned away, heart aching, knowing that the distance between them was both protection and punishment. But as she reached the stairs, she heard him add, almost to himself, "However long it takes." And though she didn't look back, a small, fragile smile touched her lips, because for the first time, she believed him. The weeks that followed blurred into a delicate balance of closeness and restraint. Every day, Lillian told herself she was keeping her distance. But the truth was harder. She had simply learned to live inside the ache of wanting something she couldn't have. Oliver had stopped pushing. Instead, he began doing the quiet, unexpected things that made it impossible not to feel him. Everywhere, the fresh flowers that appeared in the kitchen every Monday morning, the way he listened when she spoke about Leo's small triumphs, the way he seemed to breathe a little easier whenever she was near. It was a strange tenderness, gentle, unspoken, threaded through the ordinary moments of their days. There were still boundaries, yes, but they had become softer, less about rules and more about fear. Fear of what would happen if they were finally broken. One late afternoon, Lillian was in the garden, trimming the ivy that had crept up the old brick wall. The sunlight fell in slanted gold through the leaves. She didn't hear Oliver approach until his shadow crossed hers. "I didn't know you liked gardening," he said, hands in his pockets, his tone casual, but his eyes attentive. "I don't," she replied, straightening, "but this ivy's been trying to swallow the house whole. Someone has to stop it." He smiled faintly. "You've been doing that since the day you arrived, doing what, keeping everything from falling apart." She turned away before he could see the way that landed in her chest. "That's not true," she said softly. "I just fix small things. The rest isn't up to me." Oliver was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes the small things are what save us." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. She brushed the dirt from her hands. "You say that like you know. I'm starting to." That evening, the forecasted storm arrived sooner than expected. The city lights dimmed behind the curtain of rain, and thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Lillian found herself in the library, drawn by the warm glow of the fire. She loved that room, the scent of old paper and polished wood, the quiet refuge it offered from the noise of the world. She stood by the window watching the rain streak down the glass when Oliver appeared in the doorway. "You're hiding," he said gently. Maybe she admitted. It's easier to listen to the rain than to think. He crossed the room, his footsteps soft on the rug. "What are you thinking about?" She hesitated. "About leaving." The word hit the air like a stone dropped into still water. He stopped. "Leaving. The foundation in Boston," she said, her voice steady, though her hands weren't. "They called again. They want me to take the position." He looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. "And do you want to? I don't know." "You do," he said quietly. "You always know. You just don't want to say it." She exhaled, frustrated, not at him, but at herself. I want to do something that matters, Oliver. I want to use what I've learned to help people the way I always wanted to. But it feels like leaving too much behind. The rain tapped harder against the windows. The fire cracked softly. He stepped closer. You don't owe me anything, Lillian. Her throat tightened. Don't say that. It's true. It's cruel, she whispered. His eyes softened. Maybe. But it's also the only way I know how to love something, enough to let it go. For a moment, neither of them moved. The space between them hummed with everything they'd never said. Then, Leo's footsteps pattered down the hall, breaking the spell. Lillian, he called, bursting into the room with a blanket trailing behind him. The thunder's too loud. She knelt, opening her arms. Come here, sweetheart. Oliver watched as she wrapped the boy in her arms, whispering softly until his small shoulders relaxed. There was a kind of grace in her calm, the same quiet strength that had once unnerved him, but now anchored him in ways he couldn't explain. When Leo finally fell asleep on the couch, Lillian tucked the blanket around him. He's getting so big, she murmured. Oliver's gaze lingered on the two of them, his son safe and smiling in dreams, and the woman who had somehow given both their lives back a pulse. He's lucky, he said. So am I, she replied softly, but she didn't look at him when she said it. The next morning, she found a note waiting on the kitchen counter. Just 2 lines written in Oliver's elegant handwriting. Meet me at the office, 11 a.m. Oh. Curiosity and something else carried her there. When she arrived, the receptionist led her to the main conference room. The walls were lined with renderings and photographs, parks, schools, community centers, all stamped with the Blackwell Holdings insignia. Oliver stood by the window, hands in his pockets. I wanted you to see this first, he said. She stepped closer, eyes scanning the images. These are social projects. He nodded, inspired by Horizon. Your ideas. The board approved an entire division, one that focuses on rebuilding communities, supporting education, housing, health. It's yours if you want it. She turned to him, stunned. Mine, you'd lead it. Build your own team, full authority. Her lips parted, but no words came. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest. You did this. We did this, he corrected. You showed me that success doesn't mean power. It means purpose. I just gave it a name. Lillian looked back at the images. Bright colors, real people. The kind of future she'd once dreamed of before life forced her to give up dreaming. Her voice trembled. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said simply. When she met his gaze, the air between them shifted again, warm and charged. You think this will make me stay? He shook his head. No, I think it'll give you a reason to. She smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered. You really are impossible. So I've been told. The room fell quiet again. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world beyond the glass glowed with the pale light of renewal. Lillian turned toward it, feeling something inside her settle for the first time in a long while. That evening, back at the mansion, Leo ran to meet her at the door. Daddy said you're building something new, he shouted, eyes wide with pride. Can I help? She laughed, scooping him up. Of course you can. You'll be my first assistant. Oliver appeared behind them, his expression unreadable, but his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. We'll need all the help we can get. For a moment, the three of them stood there, an unfinished picture framed by light. Lillian looked at Oliver, realizing how far they'd come from that first cold night, when he'd ordered her to attend a gala she didn't belong to. Now she wasn't standing beside him because he'd asked. She was there because she chose to be. Later, when Leo was asleep, they met again in the quiet of the hallway. She hesitated, her voice low. "I'm staying," she said. He exhaled a sound that was almost relief. "I know. And this, whatever we're doing, still scares me." "It scares me too," he admitted. "But I'm done running from things that matter." Something flickered between them, then a fragile truce, a promise unspoken but understood. He didn't reach for her, and she didn't step away. They simply stood there, breathing in the same silence, knowing that for the first time the distance between them wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. Autumn came quietly that year. The trees along the driveway of the Blackwell estate burned in shades of amber and gold, and the mornings began with a kind of crisp stillness that made everything feel fragile, like a breath you didn't want to disturb. Inside the mansion, life carried on in a rhythm that was deceptively calm. The new foundation projects had begun. Lillian spent long hours at the office meeting architects, reviewing community proposals, and speaking with journalists who wanted to know how a once private corporation had turned its focus toward rebuilding lives. Oliver, meanwhile, watched from a distance, proud but also uncertain. She was brilliant, radiant even, but something had changed between them. It wasn't distance exactly, it was restraint, the kind that comes when two people feel too much and say too little. They still shared dinners with Leo, still exchanged quiet smiles in passing, but the undercurrent of unspoken emotion had deepened, pulling them both into a silence that felt heavier with each day. One evening, after a long meeting with investors, Oliver found her in the office balcony, leaning against the railing, her hair loose in the wind. The city lights shimmered below reflections caught in her eyes. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. She turned, her expression calm, but guarded. "I've been busy. That's not what I asked." Lillian held his gaze for a long moment. "Maybe I'm just trying to remember what this was supposed to be." He took a step closer. "And what was it supposed to be?" "A job," she said softly. "A chance, a purpose. Not..." She stopped herself, looking away. "Not whatever this is becoming." Oliver's jaw tightened, his control slipping just slightly. "And what do you think it's becoming?" "Something dangerous," she whispered. "Something that could ruin everything." For a moment he didn't respond. Then, in a voice barely audible, he said, "Maybe some things are worth the risk." She closed her eyes. Don't what? Don't make it harder than it already is." The air between them felt charged, like a storm about to break. Then her phone rang, cutting through the tension. She glanced at the screen, relief flickering across her face. "It's the foundation team. I need to take this." He nodded, stepping back, though his eyes followed her as she walked away. The click of her heels faded into the distance, leaving him standing there, under the soft hum of the city below. The next morning brought chaos. News outlets flooded with headlines: Blackwell Foundation under fire, allegations of misused funds. Someone had leaked false documents showing irregularities in the foundation's accounts. Lillian arrived at the office to find reporters crowding the entrance cameras, flashing voices demanding answers. Her pulse quickened, her mind racing. Inside, the boardroom was filled with tension. "This is sabotage," she said firmly, dropping the printed reports on the table. "The figures are fabricated. Someone inside the company wants this to fail." Oliver's face was unreadable. "We'll fix it." One of the board members, an older man named Hensley, sneered. "It's convenient that these errors began after your involvement, Miss Cruz." Lillian's stomach turned. You're implying I'm not implying? Hensley interrupted coldly. I'm observing. You've risen quickly here. Some might say too quickly. Before she could respond, Oliver's voice cut through the room sharp as glass. That's enough. The man bristled. I'm only saying what others are already thinking. Oliver rose his authority, filling the space. Then let me make something clear. Miss Cruz built this division with integrity. If there's a problem, it's not her doing. It's mine. The room went silent. Even Lillian froze. She looked at him startled, but he didn't meet her eyes. After the meeting, she found him alone in his office, staring out at the rain streaking down the glass. You shouldn't have done that, she said. He didn't turn. Someone had to. You just took the blame for something you didn't do. I can handle it. That's not the point, Oliver. Her voice trembled. You can't keep saving people like this. Not me. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes dark tired. Then tell me how to stop. She opened her mouth, but no words came. There was too much between them. Guilt, gratitude, longing, fear. She wanted to tell him everything, how much she cared, how terrified she was of what it meant. But before she could, his phone buzzed. A notification flashed across the screen, an email leak, this time from an anonymous source, showing images of her and Oliver at private events dinners, moments that now looked like scandal. Her heart sank. They're going to destroy everything we built. They won't. He said, his voice low but fierce. I'll protect you. But she shook her head. That's exactly the problem, Oliver. You can't. That night, when the mansion had gone quiet, Lillian sat in her room staring at the half-packed suitcase she'd shoved under the bed weeks ago. Her phone vibrated messages from journalists' friends, even her sister, all asking the same question. Is it true? She didn't answer any of them. Then there was a knock on her door. She didn't need to ask who it was. Come in, she said softly. Oliver stepped inside, his expression unreadable. His tie loosened his eyes, shadowed by exhaustion. They've retracted part of the story. The auditors confirmed the files were falsified. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by sadness. But the damage is done. He hesitated. We can rebuild it. She looked up, meeting his gaze. He stepped closer, his voice low. You know I'm not just talking about the foundation. Her throat tightened. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. He stopped inches away from her, his voice a whisper now. You think I haven't tried to fight this? You think I haven't told myself 1,000 times to stay away? Then why didn't you? Because I can't. Something inside her broke at those words. All the walls she'd built, all the logic she'd rehearsed, they crumbled under the weight of the truth between them. Oliver, she said, her voice trembling, if we do this, if we fall into this, there's no going back. I don't want to go back, he said simply. He reached out, then his hand brushing her cheek, tentative at first, as if giving her time to pull away. But she didn't. The air between them dissolved, and in that quiet, inevitable moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The kiss, when it came, wasn't perfect. It was desperate, unsteady, filled with years of loneliness and everything they'd both tried to deny. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, she pressed her forehead against his chest. What happens now? He exhaled, his hand still tangled in her hair. Now he said softly, we face it, together. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the city still glistened under the remnants of the storm. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew this was the beginning of something neither power nor fear could undo. The first time she saw him after the scandal, It felt like walking through smoke, thick, blinding, and full of things left unsaid. The storm had passed on the outside. The headlines had faded. The boardroom whispers had gone quiet. But inside, the air still trembled with the echo of what had almost destroyed them. Lillian hadn't left, not yet. Every morning she told herself she would, and every night she found a reason not to. The foundation had survived. The truth had come out. Someone from the rival firm, an old associate of Hensley's, had orchestrated the leaks to discredit Blackwell Holdings. The man had been fired, the news corrected, reputations restored, but it didn't erase the ache of those days when everything hung by a thread. Oliver had been distant since then, not cold, but careful. He gave her space, perhaps too much of it. They spoke through quiet professionalism, through glances that carried whole conversations. The kiss they had shared, the one that still haunted her dreams, was never mentioned again. It was as though it had been locked in the shadows between them, a secret too fragile to expose to daylight. One evening, long after everyone had left the office, Lillian stayed behind to finish reviewing the final phase of the community housing proposal. Her eyes were tired, her fingers smudged with pen marks. She didn't hear the door open until a soft voice broke the silence. "You still don't know when to stop working, do you?" She looked up. Oliver stood in the doorway. Ty loosened his hair, slightly disheveled, signs of the day's fatigue that somehow only made him look more human. "I could say the same to you," she replied, closing the folder. "You're supposed to be at the investor dinner. I left early." "That's not like you." "No," he said quietly. "It's not." He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. The dim light from the desk lamp cast half his face in shadow, his expression unreadable. "You've been quiet lately." "So have you." He gave a small, tired laugh. "Maybe we've both run out of words." "I don't think that's true." She hesitated. "I think we're just afraid to use the wrong ones." He met her gaze then, and for a moment, the world outside that office ceased to exist. There was something raw in his eyes, guilt, longing, and something deeper, something dangerously close to tenderness. "I never meant for any of this to touch you," he said. "I thought I could keep you safe from it. You can't protect people from everything, Oliver. Not without losing them in the process." "I know." His voice was low, almost a confession, and I nearly did. The room went still. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking time. Neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Lillian stood walking to the window. The city glowed below, restless, alive, uncaring. "I used to think I wanted stability," she said quietly, "something predictable. But lately I've started wondering if maybe I was just scared of wanting more than I was allowed to have." Oliver turned toward her, his jaw tightening. "And what is it you want now?" She hesitated, fingers tracing the edge of the glass. "To stop pretending." He took a slow step forward, then another. "I've tried," he admitted, his voice rough. "I've tried to keep my distance, to be the man I was supposed to be. But every time I see you—" He stopped, closing his eyes for a moment, as if steadying himself. "Every time it feels like the rest of the world disappears." She turned her breath, catching at the way he was looking at her. Not like a man possessed, but like someone who had finally surrendered to what he'd been fighting for too long. "Oliver," she whispered, "this isn't simple. Nothing worth it ever is." The space between them vanished. His hand came to rest against her cheek, and for a second she let herself lean into the warmth of it. His touch was careful, reverent, as though she were something he'd never dared to deserve. But then she stepped back, breaking the moment before it could break her. "You think you can fix everything by feeling too much," she said softly. But that's not how the world works. He studied her, his voice quiet but steady. Maybe not, but I can try. She exhaled, shaking her head. You don't understand. Loving you. She stopped herself, the word hanging between them like smoke. Being with you would mean giving up everything I've worked for. My independence, my credibility. You're my employer, Oliver. My partner on paper, yes, but not in this way. He didn't argue. He only nodded once slowly, as if the truth she'd spoken hurt, but didn't surprise him. Then tell me what to do, he said. Tell me how to stop. Lillian looked at him for a long time. The rain began outside, gentle at first, then harder, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and silver. If I knew how she whispered, I would have done it already. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain and the low hum of the city beneath them. Finally, Oliver broke the silence. Tomorrow I'll leave for Geneva, the international board meeting. She nodded. I know. I'll be gone for 2 weeks. Good, she said, though her voice betrayed her. You need the distance. And you? She forced a small smile. I'll manage. He took a step closer, then stopped himself. When I come back. His words trailed off. Will you still be here? She met his gaze, her heart aching. I don't know. He nodded once, accepting the answer even as it tore something from him. Then he turned and left without another word. When the door closed behind him, Lillian sank into her chair, the silence swallowing her whole. She pressed her hands to her face, feeling the tremor in her chest. There was no anger, no regret, only that aching, impossible truth. They were both right, and neither of them knew how to live with it. 2 weeks later, the first snow fell. She stood at the edge of the foundation's construction site, watching children run through the half-built playground, their laughter bright against the gray sky. Her phone buzzed an international number. She didn't answer it. Instead, she slipped it into her coat pocket, closed her eyes, and let the cold wind sting her cheeks. Miles away, in a conference hall filled with polished marble and polite applause, Oliver checked his phone, saw the missed call icon glowing back at him, and smiled faintly. Not with disappointment, but with something quieter, more certain. Because for the first time in years, he realized that what connected them wasn't control or proximity. It was faith, the quiet, stubborn kind, that waited even when it hurt to do so. And somewhere between the falling snow and the fading light, both of them knew their story wasn't finished. It was only pausing, waiting for the moment when one of them would finally stop running. The first snow of December lingered longer than usual that year, covering the city in a muted calm that almost felt like forgiveness. For Lillian, the days had blurred into a quiet rhythm. Work, the foundation, Leo. Everything was steady, predictable, even peaceful. But beneath that calm lived an ache she couldn't name, one that came alive every time her phone lit up. And it wasn't him. Oliver had been gone for almost 3 weeks now. Geneva, Paris, London, his itinerary was splashed across the business news headlines, each article describing new partnerships and humanitarian projects under Blackwell Holdings' growing social initiative. He was everywhere, and yet nowhere near her. Every night after putting Leo to bed, she found herself at the window, staring at the faint glow of the city skyline, wondering if somewhere across the ocean he was looking at the same sky. She told herself it was foolish, that she had work to focus on, a life to live. And yet, when the silence stretched too long, she found her thoughts wandering back to the memory of his voice, its steadiness, its warmth, the way it broke when he said her name like it mattered. She didn't expect him to come back early. It was a Thursday morning when she walked into the foundation office, coffee in hand, ready for another routine meeting. The elevator doors opened, and there he was, standing at the far end of the hallway, dressed in black, talking quietly with a member of the board. For a heartbeat, she froze. When he turned and saw her, the conversation stopped. The board member excused himself quickly, leaving them alone in the stretch of glass and marble silence. "You're back," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse wasn't. "I am," he replied, a few days earlier than planned. She hesitated, unsure what else to say. "How was Geneva productive?" He said, his tone neutral. "But not the same without someone arguing with me about everything." Despite herself, a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "You do realize not everyone sees disagreement as affection, right, with you?" he said softly. "I've learned it often means the opposite." For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt like a living thing, fragile, trembling, full of everything they hadn't said before he left. She wanted to tell him she had missed him, that every day had felt quieter without him. But all she managed was, "You should get some rest. You look exhausted." "I could say the same to you," he said gently. "You've been working nonstop." She turned away. "That's what I do." He nodded once, not pushing further. But as she walked past him, she caught the faintest trace of his cologne, familiar, grounding, and entirely too dangerous. That evening, the annual winter gala for the foundation was held at the historic Belmont Hall, a charity event Lillian had helped organize for months. The ballroom glowed with soft gold light, the air filled with the quiet hum of conversation and music. She wore a gown of deep emerald satin, her hair swept up in a loose knot, a pair of delicate pearl earrings catching the light. It was elegant without being ostentatious, exactly like her. When Oliver arrived, every head turned. He had always commanded a room effortlessly, but tonight there was something different, something quieter, less polished. His gaze found hers, almost immediately, and the world narrowed until there was no one else. "You clean up well," she said when he finally reached her side. "You always did underestimate my charm," he replied, offering his arm. "Shall we?" She hesitated for half a second, then took it. They walked into the heart of the ballroom together, and for the first time in months, it felt right. Not perfect, not easy, just right. Throughout the evening, they mingled with guests, answered questions from journalists, and gave speeches about the foundation's achievements. Yet every time their eyes met across the room, something unspoken passed between them, a warmth, a question, a longing. During the last set of the night, the band began playing a slow waltz. The crowd thinned as couples drifted onto the dance floor. Oliver found her by the balcony doors, her hands wrapped around a glass of champagne she hadn't touched. "Dance with me," he said quietly. She looked up, startled. "Oliver." "It's just a dance," he said. "Nothing more." Her hesitation lasted only a breath. Then she placed her hand in his, and he led her to the floor. The music wrapped around them, soft, lilting, impossibly intimate. He moved with quiet confidence, his hand resting at her waist, guiding her gently through each step. "You've been practicing," she murmured. "I had to survive a few diplomatic dinners," he said with a faint smile. "Turns out international investors love ballroom dancing." She laughed softly, but it faded when she met his eyes. There was something different in them tonight, an openness, a fragility that unnerved her. "Lillian," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to convince myself that what I feel for you will fade with time." Her breath caught. "And did it?" "No," he said simply. "It got worse." She looked away, her voice trembling. Don't say that here. Not like this. Then tell me where, he said, his grip tightening slightly. Tell me when I can. She couldn't. The air felt too thin, the music too loud. Every word she didn't say pressed against her ribs. When the song ended, she stepped back. I should go check on the staff, she murmured, already moving away. He didn't stop her. He only watched her go, knowing that if he followed, he might never stop. Later, when the event was over and the last guests had left, Lillian lingered in the empty ballroom, gathering leftover programs and candles. The silence felt heavier than usual. She turned when she heard footsteps, Oliver still in his tuxedo, his jacket undone, his expression unreadable. You're still here, she said softly. So are you. She set down the papers. You shouldn't be. It's late. I couldn't leave. She frowned slightly. Why? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Because I keep thinking of all the times I should have said something and didn't. That night at the restaurant, the day you almost left, before I got on that plane, every single moment I convinced myself I'd already lost you. Her throat tightened. Oliver. He stepped closer, his voice steady now. I'm not asking for promises. I just need you to know that I don't want to spend another day pretending this is just business. The world seemed to still around them. She could hear the faint hum of the city beyond the windows, the soft echo of music long faded. Her pulse raced, but her voice was calm when she spoke. You think saying this will make it easier? He said quietly, but not saying it anymore might finally make it honest. She stared at him, torn between reason and desire, between everything she'd built and everything she'd begun to feel. And for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to stop fighting, to step closer instead of away. Then Leo's laughter echoed in her memory, grounding her like a thread back to reality. She swallowed hard. Good night, Oliver. She turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking softly against the marble. He didn't follow, not this time. But as the doors closed behind her, he knew the truth as clearly as she did. Some distances weren't measured in miles, but in the courage it took to cross them. And both of them, for now, were standing right at the edge. The morning after the gala was quieter than most. A soft drizzle hung over the city, blurring the skyline beyond the office windows. Lillian sat at her desk, a half-finished cup of coffee beside her, the faint hum of rain against the glass, matching the rhythm of her thoughts. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, Oliver's face under the golden light of the ballroom, his voice when he'd said he didn't want to pretend anymore. Those words had stayed with her, too heavy to carry, too meaningful to forget. She tried to bury herself in work. Meetings, calls, numbers, things that made sense, things she could control. But even as she spoke with her team about the new education project, her mind kept drifting. What scared her wasn't what he had said. It was how much she had wanted to believe it. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped, replaced by the faint glow of sunlight pushing through the clouds. She stepped outside for a moment of air, standing under the glass awning, the scent of wet concrete rising around her. That was when she heard the familiar voice behind her. Leaving early. Her heart skipped. She turned slowly to find Oliver leaning against one of the stone pillars. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair damp from the drizzle. Hardly she replied, forcing composure. Just needed a break. From the world, or from me, both probably, she said, too tired to lie. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. That's fair. They stood there for a moment, neither moving. The street stretched out before them, quiet, except for the occasional hiss of tires, on wet pavement. "You haven't said much since the gala," he said finally. "There's nothing left to say." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But silence doesn't make it easier." She looked at him, then really looked, the exhaustion in his eyes, the hint of regret behind his calm. "You think everything can be solved if we just talk enough, don't you?" "Not everything," he said softly. "But maybe this." She shook her head. "You don't understand what you're asking, Oliver. If I let this become something, I'll lose the only stability I've ever built for myself. The moment people see me as the CEO's lover, everything I've worked for will vanish." His jaw tightened. "You think I'd let that happen? You couldn't stop it. Not from them, not from the world." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Then let the world talk. Let them misunderstand. You've spent your whole life fighting to be enough for everyone. What if just once you let yourself be enough for yourself?" Lillian's breath caught. She wanted to tell him that it wasn't that simple, that she couldn't risk everything on something as fragile as hope. But before she could speak, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and froze. It was a message from Meredith Kensington. "I hear congratulations are in order. The city's talking about you two again. This time you might want to check the news." Her stomach dropped. She unlocked her phone, her pulse pounding as she opened the headline splashed across the top of a business site. "Blackwell CEO linked to foundation director, romance, or corruption. Anonymous source raises concerns over misused influence." She felt the ground shift beneath her. The article was full of speculation, implying that her position had been earned through favoritism. Photos from the gala, her dancing with Oliver, the way he'd looked at her, were cropped and magnified, painted as proof of a scandal. Oliver saw her expression before she could speak. "What is it?" She handed him the phone with trembling hands. He read the headline once, then again, his face hardening. "Who leaked this?" he muttered. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice brittle. "It's out now. It matters," he said sharply, "because I'm not letting them destroy you again." She stepped back. "Don't you see? It's already happening. I warned you, Oliver. This is exactly why I can't, why we can't." He looked at her, his anger dissolving into something quieter, sadder. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away?" "I'm not walking away from you," she whispered. "I'm walking away from the version of me the world will try to make out of this." Before he could respond, she turned and walked back inside, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. That night, her apartment felt colder than usual. She sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through the endless comments online, some cruel, some sympathetic, all invasive. Her name was trending. Her image, once tied to hope and compassion, was now twisted into rumor. There was a soft knock on her door just after midnight. When she opened it, Oliver was standing there, rain clinging to his coat, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Don't," she said quietly. "You shouldn't be here." "I'm not leaving you alone in this," he said simply. "You can't fix this one." "I'm not trying to fix it," he said, stepping inside before she could stop him. "I just need you to know I'm not going anywhere." She turned away, her arms crossed, holding herself together. "You shouldn't say that unless you mean it. I mean every word." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. He moved closer, his voice low. "You built something incredible here, Lillian. You changed lives. No headline, no rumor can take that from you." Her voice cracked. "But they'll try." "Then let them," he said, his tone softening. "You told me once that real strength wasn't about control. It was about courage. Maybe this is our chance to prove it." She finally turned toward him. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," he said. "It never will be. But if I've learned anything from you, it's that the right things rarely are." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then quietly he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away this time. The storm outside grew louder, thunder rumbling across the city. Oliver exhaled his thumb, brushing against her skin. "We can face this together, but not if you keep shutting me out." Her eyes shimmered. "I don't know how to do this." "Then let me help you learn." It was too much, the kindness in his voice, the steadiness in his presence. She closed her eyes, feeling the first tear slip down her cheek. He caught it gently with his thumb. "Hey," he whispered, "look at me." When she did, he smiled faintly. "You once told me I didn't know how to be human. You were right, but you changed that." Her breath trembled. "And you made me believe in things I'd stopped trusting." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat through the space between them. The air thickened with everything unsaid, everything fragile and real. Then maybe, he murmured, "we stop pretending we're supposed to do this alone." The world outside roared with thunder, but neither of them moved. And in the quiet that followed, something shifted, not the beginning of a fairy tale, not the end of a struggle, but the fragile, undeniable truth of two people who had finally stopped running from what was already theirs. The morning after the storm felt like the city had exhaled. The rain had washed away the grime on the streets, leaving the air sharp, clean, and full of something that almost resembled hope. Inside her apartment, Lillian woke to the pale light slipping through the curtains. The world was quiet, but her thoughts weren't. The night before replayed in her mind, Oliver's words, his hand in hers. The way the silence between them had felt less like distance and more like truth. She hadn't expected him to stay. Yet when she walked into the living room there, he was half asleep on the couch, still in his shirt from the night before, his jacket draped over him like an afterthought. There was something strangely tender about seeing him like that, unguarded, at peace, a man who carried too much, but for once let the weight rest. She stood for a while watching him, unsure whether to wake him or let him dream. Then quietly, she set a cup of coffee on the table beside him. The faint clink of porcelain made his eyes open slowly. "Morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "You should have gone home." "I did," he said, sitting up. "Yours just feels closer lately." She rolled her eyes, but her lips softened into a smile she didn't mean to show. "You're impossible." "Consistent," he corrected, sipping the coffee. "It's one of my more admirable flaws." For a moment, everything felt almost normal. No rumors, no fear, just two people trying to remember what it felt like to breathe. But normal, she knew, was fragile, and it didn't last. By noon, the news had taken a darker turn. Another article had appeared online this time, not just speculation, but accusation. An anonymous insider claimed that funds from the foundation's humanitarian projects had been redirected to private accounts under Lillian's management. The story was detailed enough to sound real, cruel enough to do damage. She read it twice, her hands trembling. "They're saying I stole from the foundation," she whispered. Oliver took the tablet from her hands, his jaw tightening as he scanned the article. "It's a fabrication. You know that." "But the public doesn't," she said. "And the board won't either. Not at first. I'll handle it." "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Not this time. If you go out there defending me again, they'll think it's favoritism. It'll only make it worse." He stared at her frustration flickering behind his calm. "Then what do you suggest? That you take the blame for something you didn't do?" She took a deep breath, forcing the tremor from her voice. "I'm suggesting we do nothing until we have proof. Whoever's behind this planned it carefully. If we move too fast, We'll walk straight into their trap." Oliver hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll find the proof first." The next few days blurred into long hours and little sleep. Lillian pored through records files, transfer receipts, anything that could explain the false entries. Oliver worked quietly beside her, calling in auditors and investigators. Their lives became a series of late nights and whispered conversations, the hum of the city outside blending with the soft rustle of paper and the glow of computer screens. By the third night, exhaustion had stripped away their defenses. It was close to midnight when Lillian pushed away from her desk, rubbing her temples. "This is useless," she murmured. Whoever did this knew exactly what to hide. Oliver stood behind her chair, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll find it. We always do." She tilted her head slightly toward his touch, eyes closed. "You always make it sound so certain." "Because I need it to be," he said quietly. "You don't deserve to carry this alone." The warmth of his hand lingered, steady grounding. She looked up at him, then their faces close enough that she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. "You know, for a man who built his life on control," she whispered, "you're surprisingly good at chaos." He smiled faintly. "Only when it's yours." Their eyes met and something shifted, gentle but unmistakable. The air between them thickened, filled with words neither dared to say aloud. She rose slowly, standing in front of him, her heartbeat quickening. "Oliver," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "if we keep crossing this line, we won't be able to go back." "Then let's stop pretending there's a line left," he replied. The words hung there, soft but irrevocable. And then he kissed her, careful at first, as though afraid she might disappear if he moved too quickly. But when she didn't pull away, the restraint dissolved. The kiss deepened, slow and sure, like an admission neither of them could take back. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead against his chest, her breath uneven. "You realize, this doesn't solve anything," she said. "I know," he murmured, his hand in her hair, "but it reminds me why I want to." They didn't talk after that. They didn't need to. The night stretched on quietly, the kind of quiet that comes only after two storms finally meet. 2 days later, the truth surfaced. The internal audit traced the false transactions back to a shell company tied to one of Meredith's former associates. It was enough to clear Lillian publicly and enough to make Meredith dangerous again. Oliver stood in his office reading the final report. "She won't stop," he said. "Not until she's destroyed everything connected to you." "Then let her try," Lillian said from the doorway. "I'm not the same woman I was when this started." He turned toward her, his expression softening. "No, you're stronger. I had to be," she said, a quiet smile touching her lips. "You taught me how to fight differently." He took a slow step closer. "And you taught me how to feel." The confession hung in the air, delicate and raw. She looked up at him, the space between them shrinking once again. "You know this won't end neatly," she said softly. "It never does." "I don't want neat," he replied. "I just want real." For the first time in months, she let herself laugh, a small, genuine sound that filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. He smiled too, the kind of smile that said he hadn't seen something so beautiful in a long time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Oliver found her on the balcony, overlooking the city. The wind tangled in her hair, and for a moment, he simply stood there, memorizing her silhouette against the fading light. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that maybe all of this, every fight, every mistake was just leading us here?" He stepped beside her. "If it was, I'd go through it all again." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the city below. You mean that? More than I've meant anything. And in that moment, with the world stretched out beneath them and the weight of everything they'd endured finally beginning to lift, she realized that love didn't always arrive as a promise. Sometimes it came as a choice, a decision to stay, even when everything tried to pull you apart. She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't distance anymore. It was belonging. Winter loosened its grip slowly as if reluctant to let go. The frost on the window panes melted into threads of silver, and the air carried that first quiet hint of spring, soft, fragile, and full of beginnings. Months had passed since the scandal, since the nights spent in fear, and the headlines that threatened to undo everything. The city had moved on, and so somehow had they. Lillian stood in the new community center's courtyard, sunlight spilling over the fresh paint and newly planted trees. Children's laughter echoed in the distance as Leo ran across the grass, his jacket unzipped, his cheeks pink from the cold. It was opening day for the Foundation's first completed project, a home for displaced families, something built from months of sleepless nights, bruised faith, and quiet perseverance. She watched the ribbon flutter in the wind and felt a stillness inside her she hadn't known in years. Oliver was speaking with a group of donors nearby, his posture as composed as ever. But she could see it now, the softness that lived just beneath the surface. The man who once believed control was strength now carried something different in his eyes, something warmer, something that felt like peace. When his gaze found hers across the courtyard, the world seemed to hush for a second. He excused himself and walked toward her, his steps unhurried, his smile faint but real. "Looks like it's finally happening," he said, his voice low. "It is," she replied, "after everything." He looked around at the volunteers and families moving through the courtyard. "You did this." "We did," she corrected gently. Oliver studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing it all the time?" she said softly. "But maybe that's what made it real. You don't learn how strong something is until it's been tested." He nodded slowly. "You always were better at seeing the light in the wreckage." "Someone had to be," she teased. He smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I should thank you for saving me from myself." Her voice softened. "You saved me too, Oliver. Just in a different way." The ceremony began soon after. The mayor gave a speech, cameras flashed, and Lillian was called to the front to cut the ribbon. Applause rose. Laughter rippled through the crowd. It was a moment of triumph, yet her heart felt strangely still, calm, full grounded. When she stepped off the small stage, Oliver was there waiting, hands in his pockets, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You looked terrified," he murmured. "I hate public speaking," she said. "You fooled everyone." "Good." She smiled. "That's half my job." He leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. "The other half is driving me insane, I assume." She glanced up at him, pretending to think. "That part comes naturally." Their laughter mingled soft and familiar, blending into the hum of the celebration. And for a fleeting moment, everything felt simple again. Later that evening, when the guests had left and the courtyard had emptied, Lillian wandered through the quiet halls of the building. The scent of fresh paint still lingered, and the polished floors reflected the fading light from the windows. She found herself standing in one of the finished classrooms, a place meant for children who had nowhere else to go. The walls were lined with shelves of books, and on one of the tables sat a stack of notebooks untouched and waiting. "You're not supposed to be working," came Oliver's voice from the doorway. She turned. "I'm not. Remembering? He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing softly. What are you remembering? How it started. How impossible it felt. He smiled faintly. And yet, here we are. She looked around, eyes tracing the space that had once been nothing more than a dream. Do you ever wonder what's next? Every day, he said. But for once, I don't need to have the answer. They stood there for a moment, the quiet between them, easy now, no longer fragile. She turned toward him, the light catching in her hair, and for the first time she didn't try to hide the way she looked at him. I used to think love had to be perfect, she said softly, that it had to follow rules, make sense, fit neatly into a life I could control. And now I think it just has to be true. Oliver reached out his hand, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Then let's be true, he said quietly. Whatever that means, whatever it takes. She felt her pulse quicken, not from uncertainty this time, but from the peace that came with finally choosing. She took a slow step closer, her fingers brushing his coat. You really think we can make this work? He smiled, a quiet kind of smile that carried everything they'd been through. We already are. The world outside had grown dimmer, the soft pink of twilight bleeding into the sky. In the half-light of the classroom, he kissed her, unhurried, steady, like a promise, kept too long. There was no desperation this time, no fear of losing what they had. It was simply an acknowledgement of everything they'd endured, everything they'd become. When they broke apart, she leaned into him, her head against his chest, listening to the quiet rhythm of his heart. Do you ever wish things had happened differently? She asked. He thought for a moment, then shook his head. No. If they had, I might never have found you. She smiled faintly. That's dangerously close to romantic. Don't tell anyone, he murmured. I have a reputation to protect. Outside, the last light of day slipped behind the skyline. The building was silent now, but alive. The hum of heat through the vents, the distant sound of laughter from a janitor's radio. It felt like the kind of silence that comes after chaos. Not empty, but full of promise. They walked out together into the courtyard, where the ribbon from the ceremony fluttered faintly in the evening breeze. Leo was waiting near the gate, chasing the wind with a paper airplane, his laughter echoing through the open space. When he saw them, he ran forward, waving. Mom, Oliver. Look, it flies better now. Lillian crouched to catch the paper plane as it drifted toward her. It does, she said, smiling. Much better. Oliver watched them, his heart full in a way he couldn't quite name. He had spent years chasing success, control, redemption. But in that moment, watching Lillian's laughter mix with Leo's, he realized he'd finally found something that mattered more than all of it. Something unmeasured, something lasting. As they left the courtyard together, the city lights flickered on, one by one, bathing the streets in gold. Oliver took her hand, not as a question this time, but as a quiet certainty. She didn't pull away. And somewhere in that stillness, in the cool breath of spring, in the warmth of two hands, finding each other after everything, they finally understood that love at its truest was not about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about endurance, about showing up even when the world had every reason to make you stop. Their story hadn't been written in ease or perfection, but in persistence, in forgiveness, in the way two hearts, worn and imperfect, had somehow found their rhythm again. And as they walked into the soft glow of the evening laughter, echoing faintly behind them, it felt for the first time not like an ending, but like coming home.